Rolling right along now, talking about ambiguity aversion within the context of financial decision making. Now remember, ambiguity aversion is our preference for risk over uncertainty. So as long as we can see the risks that are involved, we would feel much more comfortable knowing those risks than just going into an uncertain situation. And so, what this does with our financial decision making is it leads to under diversification. So, that means we feel like we know certain stocks or certain areas of the market and we feel comfortable there, but we don't diversify our assets properly, which this under diversification if you were part of the intro to market efficiency, we realized that by diversification, we can eliminate all unsystematic risk. Everything left is beta. But this under diversification that many people utilize is the only free lunch that markets give people. So we need to take that and properly diversify our portfolios. And by the way, that's another Harry Markowitz quote that the only free lunch in market is diversification. But then what the term that we like to see here around ambiguity inversion, which is, to use a business term, this low-hanging fruit of diversification for many people that they don't utilize, is coming from the home bias. What is called the home bias. And this is where domestic investors own mostly domestic stocks and companies and fail to diversify their portfolios internationally, missing out on the diversification benefits of being invested with international stocks. And so, home bias, investing primarily in domestic stocks, and this is ultimately foregoing benefits of diversification. So we need to explain this home bias. Why are we so heavily invested in our own stock market? And what I find even more interesting, the more financial advisors I talk to who are out on the front lines talking to their clients, they see this home bias in their portfolios, and yet they get a very negative sentiment about domestic stock performance from those very same clients. So they have all their eggs in this basket and they're unwilling to diversify, but they still think that the basket that they have is shit. So, but they don't want to change it. And so again, we're trying to unpack here some of the reasons why, even despite that, why would you still stay in your domestic stock portfolio? Well, a couple that we have here that keep us with these home domestic stocks is language. So speaking the same language. So we tend to stay away from stocks that are originated in other languages. And so that can make some sense, even though most international stocks have English available annual reports even. But the language barrier tends to keep us away. So even if we have two stocks or two companies that are very, very similar, one's underpriced, but we tend to stay away from that because the language barrier keeps things a little bit ambiguous or uncertain. And once again, this is driving us back to our ambiguity aversion. Number two, cultures, different cultures. And that's not just companies that are based in other cultures. Sometimes there's a predisposition for people to not invest in companies that have CEOs who are not from the same culture, just because there's this unfamiliarity around the culture. And once again, it leads to ambiguity, which draws us away once again. So we tend to shy away from those companies, even run by CEOs, and companies that are based in other cultures, especially those that are different from your own culture. So I'm talking about this, by the way, from a US standpoint, but it should be noted that whatever country you are in, there's the tendency for those citizens or those individuals to stay within their own country. So if you're from Germany, then your home bias is predominantly invested in German stocks and not investing in international stocks. So just to make sure that point was clear. And then there's also this belief in informational advantage. We sometimes believe that because the company is in our own country, that we have a better grasp on what's actually happening. And you can imagine that. So if I'm a US citizen, we have an informational advantage. Even if there's the same company based out in Japan, halfway around the world, with different cultures, different languages, we still can feel like we have this belief in better information. And this will actually take us into what we call regional. So this belief in international informational advantages take us one step closer in this home bias into even regional and local trends. People have a tendency to be even more biased or more weighted for companies that are in their own region or own city. So here in Indianapolis, we've got some big companies. Eli Lilly's here, Salesforce is around. We've got Anthem. We've got some well-known companies here that are quite large. And there's a lot of people who believe, well, I know people who work there, so I feel way more comfortable putting all my eggs in that basket and investing in that stock. But what are the dangers of this? And this is where we want to come back to this whole diversification, is if you are heavily invested in your regional stocks or local stocks, well, then your eggs are all in that basket. You're even more under diversified. And by that means if things are going well, hey, good for you. Your job's probably doing well. Your portfolio is doing well. But what it also means is by having all your eggs in this basket, if things go poorly here, then that means your job situation is probably looking worse and your portfolio is going to go down if something were to happen regionally or locally. Once again, no benefits of international diversification that could be maybe isolated to the US and would be offset by having a portfolio outside of the United States. So that's the whole point here about trying to stay away from these local trends. This is the whole point of trying to hedge some of your outcomes. And I'll never forget having a conversation with a client during the financial crisis who was working at Bear Stearns, and he sold this leveraged ETF that was short the banking industry during the financial crisis. And we sold that for about I want to say about a $300,000 profit. And I was on the phone with him. I said, "Hey, that was a really good trade. Like, what prompted this?" And he said, "Well, I was working at Lehman Brothers, and I realized that I can't short Lehman stock, but I realized that if Lehman Brothers was going to go down and I was going to lose my job, then this was going to be my safety net." He said, and that's exactly what happened. And I was happy that I hedged myself because now I've got a nice nest egg to transition myself into another job. So that's where I really like to think about how we can use diversification as a hedging strategy for those rainy days. Now, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. That's the home bias. I think I said everything. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we're trucking right along, and we don't have that much more to go. So keep going, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks, everyone.